Princess Valerie of the Xelari Empire stepped off her royal shuttle with perfect grace. Her violet eyes scanned the massive space station before her, taking in the towering steel corridors, the artificial gravity hum, and the faint scent of metal in the air. She had visited many diplomatic outposts before, but never one under human control. It was an uneasy thought. Her golden ceremonial armor reflected the bright lights above as she walked forward, her sharp heels clicking against the polished floor. She was here for one reason: to negotiate a ceasefire between the Xelari Empire and the Terran Federation. The war had lasted too long. Millions had died on both sides. Peace was necessary, but that did not mean she liked dealing with humans. The Xelari had always considered humans primitive. Their technology was impressive, but their culture was unpredictable. Their species was young, aggressive, and, according to Xelari scholars, lacking the refinement of more advanced civilizations. Valerie had always believed that. Until now. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, waiting for her. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the sleek, dark uniform of a Terran Federation officer. His posture was relaxed, yet alert, like a predator ready to strike. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers the moment she approached. Captain Elias Grant, her escort, her equal in these negotiations. Valerie forced herself to maintain her usual regal composure. She would not let a human soldier unsettle her. Yet there was something about the way he stood, calm, unwavering, that irritated her. She had expected arrogance or hostility. Instead, she found something far more dangerous: confidence. "Your Highness," Grant said, nodding in greeting. His voice was steady, deep, and completely unshaken by her presence. "Welcome aboard." She studied him carefully. Most species hesitated in the presence of a Xelari royal. Her kind were known for their elegance, their superior intellect, their power. But this human, he did not bow. He did not look intimidated. That was new. "Captain Grant," she replied smoothly, folding her hands behind her back. "I trust the Federation understands the importance of these negotiations." Grant's lips curled into a slight smirk. "I wouldn't be here otherwise, Princess." Something about that answer made her tail flick, a subconscious reaction she quickly suppressed. The Xelari were masters of diplomacy. She would not let a human soldier get under her skin. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin. "Take me to the meeting chamber." Grant turned on his heel, leading the way. As they walked through the station's corridors, Valerie took in her surroundings. The humans had built their space outposts with practicality in mind. No intricate designs, no artistic flourishes, just cold, functional steel. It was efficient, but lacked soul. "Not what you expected, is it?" Grant's voice broke the silence. She glanced at him, frowning. "Excuse me." "The station," he said, motioning around them. "I saw you looking. It's not as pretty as your empire's golden cities, is it?" Valerie narrowed her eyes slightly. "Efficiency is admirable, if somewhat uninspired." Grant chuckled, a low, amused sound that made something tighten in her chest. "I'll take admirable as a compliment." She exhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. This human had an irritating way of reading between the lines. It was frustrating. They entered the meeting chamber, a large, circular room with a massive holotable at the center. High-ranking officers from both sides were already present, their gazes filled with distrust. The air was tense. Valerie took her seat across from Grant. The real battle was about to begin, not one of weapons, but of words. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't entirely sure if she had the upper hand. Princess Valerie sat at the negotiation table, her posture perfect, her expression calm. The Xelari Empire had trained her for moments like this. She was a leader, a warrior, and a diplomat. She did not show weakness. She did not let emotions cloud her judgment. Yet, sitting across from Captain Elias Grant, she found herself struggling. The human soldier leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. His dark uniform fit snugly over his broad frame, and his sharp blue eyes watched her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not because he was threatening. No, his expression was almost amused, like he had already figured something out about her that she hadn't even realized herself. The discussion had begun formally, with both sides listing their demands for a ceasefire. The Exilary Empire wanted control over key star systems. The Terran Federation demanded trade agreements and border security. It was all standard negotiation talk. But then, Grant spoke. "Let's be honest, Princess," he said, his voice steady and confident. "Neither of us wants to be here." Valerie blinked. That was direct. She folded her hands together. "We are here because peace is necessary." Grant smirked. "Necessary, sure. But do you want it?" A quiet tension filled the air. The other Exilary representatives glanced at her, waiting for her response. She could feel the human officers doing the same with Grant. Valerie took a slow breath. She would not let a human soldier rattle her. War is costly. Our people suffer. Only a fool would reject peace. Grant tilted his head slightly. "Fair answer. But suffering isn't enough to stop war, is it?" Valerie's fingers twitched slightly, though she kept her face neutral. He was testing her, pushing at the edges of her control. "I assume," she said, voice cool, "that humans also grow tired of war." Grant chuckled softly. "Oh, we do. But humans are stubborn. When pushed, we push back, and we push hard." Something about the way he said it made her throat tighten. There was no arrogance in his voice, just simple, undeniable truth. She had studied human history. Unlike the Xilari, who built their empire through careful expansion, humans had fought for everything. Their homeworld had seen centuries of war, and each battle had made them stronger. When humans faced destruction, they didn't surrender. They adapted. They survived. And now she was sitting across from one of them, trying to make peace. For the first time, she wasn't sure if the Xilari had the upper hand in these talks. She shifted slightly in her seat, hoping no one noticed. But Grant did. His smirk grew just a fraction wider. "Something wrong, Your Highness." Valerie's tail flicked before she could stop it. A small, barely noticeable movement. But he caught it. "Annoying human." She straightened her shoulders. "Not at all, Captain." His gaze lingered on her for a second longer before he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Good, because these negotiations aren't going to be easy." She narrowed her eyes. "You assume I expected them to be." He grinned. "No, I assume you're used to having more control." Her composure nearly cracked. Nearly. The worst part, he wasn't wrong. For years, she had been the one with power in every negotiation. She had always dictated the terms. The other side had always feared her empire's strength. But humans didn't fear. Grant didn't fear. And that unsettled her more than anything. The meeting continued for another hour, filled with debates over resources, alliances, and territorial disputes. Valerie forced herself to focus, but her mind kept drifting to the human across from her. His confidence was different from the arrogance she had seen in other species. He didn't need to prove himself. He simply was. By the time the session ended, she felt strangely drained. As they left the meeting room, Grant walked beside her. "You handled that well," he said casually. She raised an eyebrow. "Did you expect otherwise?" Grant chuckled. "Not at all. But I think you're starting to see something." She frowned. "And what is that, Captain?" He glanced at her, his smirk returning. "Humans aren't what you expected." Valerie's tail flicked again, this time in irritation. She quickened her pace, putting a few steps between them. She refused to admit he was right. But deep down, she knew he was. Princess Valerie was not accustomed to feeling out of control. Yet, ever since she had met Captain Elias Grant, she had found herself unsettled in ways she could not explain. He was not what she had expected from a human. He was sharp, confident, and impossible to intimidate. Worst of all, he knew it. Now, standing in a large training hall aboard the space station, she prepared to regain her footing. The peace talks had reached a standstill. Both sides were unwilling to give in on key issues. To resolve this, the human diplomats had suggested an alternative, an ancient Sci-Fi custom known as the right of proving. It was simple, a physical contest between two representatives, meant to demonstrate strength, skill, and discipline. Not a fight to the death, of course. Just a test, a show of power. Valerie had agreed immediately. It was a way to prove the Sci-Fi were superior, a way to remind Grant that, no matter how confident he was, she was still his better. But now, as she stood in the combat ring, watching Grant stretch his arms with an easy smirk, she wondered if she had made a mistake. "This is a first," Grant said, rolling his shoulders. "Didn't think I'd be fighting royalty today." Valerie lifted her chin. "This is not a fight, Captain. It is a test of skill." "Right," he said, stepping forward. "Just a test." The way he said it made her tail flick. The other diplomats and officers stood at the edge of the arena, watching. The training hall was silent except for the hum of the force field barrier around the ring, ensuring no one outside got hurt. A Sci-Fi referee raised his arm. "Begin." Valerie moved first. She struck fast, her movements precise. Her kind were naturally agile, and her years of training made her a formidable opponent. She expected Grant to struggle to keep up. He didn't. He dodged her first strike effortlessly, leaning just out of reach. She adjusted, aiming a sweeping kick at his legs, but he sidestepped, his footwork fluid. Interesting. She attacked again, this time pressing harder. A series of quick strikes, one to the ribs, another to the shoulder, a feint before an attempted leg sweep. Grant blocked, deflected, and evaded with frustrating ease. Then he countered. Fast, strong, precise. Valerie barely had time to react as he closed the distance, his palm stopping just inches from her exposed side. If it had been a real fight, she would have taken a heavy hit. She twisted away, creating space between them. Her heart pounded. He smirked. Not bad. Valerie refused to let him see how irritated she was. Instead, she attacked again. The match continued for several minutes, each exchange more intense than the last. She was faster, but he was adaptable. She had superior technique, but he had an uncanny ability to read her movements. She had never fought a human before. Now she was starting to understand why their species was so dangerous. Still, she refused to lose. With a sudden burst of speed, she spun, feinting left before shifting her weight and aiming a high kick toward his head. It was her fastest move yet. Grant caught her ankle midair. Her breath hitched. For a moment, they were frozen in place, her leg held in his grip, his other hand hovering just inches from her throat. If this were a real battle, they would both be dead. Silence. Then, Grant let go, stepping back. Call it a draw. Valerie landed lightly, standing tall. A draw. Unacceptable. And yet, she exhaled, forcing her expression to remain neutral. Very well. The referee nodded. Match over. The tension in the room eased. The watching diplomats murmured among themselves. Even though no words had been spoken, the message was clear. Neither side was weak. Both were worthy of respect. As they exited the ring, Grant walked beside her. I'll be honest, Princess. You're impressive. Valerie glanced at him. You expected otherwise. He chuckled. No, but I think you're starting to see something. She frowned. And what is that, Captain? His smirk returned. Humans are full of surprises. Valerie turned away, refusing to let him see the flicker of emotion in her eyes. Because deep down, she knew he was right. She refused to show it, but the feeling burned inside her as she walked through the steel corridors of the human space station. The right of proving had not gone as planned. She had expected to dominate the contest, to prove the superiority of the Xilari. Instead, she had barely managed a draw against Captain Elias Grant. And worse, he had enjoyed it. She could still hear his voice in her mind. Humans are full of surprises. Her tail flicked sharply behind her. Annoying human. She had spent years mastering control over her emotions, her expressions, her every movement. A Xilari princess did not let frustration show. She did not let her composure break. Yet, ever since meeting Grant, she had struggled to keep that control. She needed to clear her mind. The station had a large observation deck overlooking deep space. It was the only place on board that did not feel entirely human. No dull steel, no cold metal walls. Just a massive window stretching across the entire room, revealing the endless stars beyond. She stepped inside and let out a slow breath. The galaxy always looked different from space. So vast, so full of endless possibilities. Wars were fought over these stars. But in the end, did any of it truly belong to them? She wasn't alone. Grant stood at the far end of the observation deck, leaning casually against the railing. He turned when he noticed her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "Couldn't sleep." Valerie folded her arms. "I do not require much rest." Grant smirked. Convenient. She ignored his tone and walked forward, stopping a few feet away from him. The stars reflected in his sharp blue eyes. It was strange. Humans were so different from Xilari, yet something about him felt familiar. "I underestimated you," she admitted quietly. Grant raised an eyebrow. "That's so." She gave a small nod. "Your people are more capable than I expected." He chuckled. "That almost sounds like a compliment, princess." Valerie exhaled slowly. "Do not misunderstand. I still believe the Xilari are superior in many ways. But I see now that humans are not as reckless as I once thought." Grant studied her for a moment before saying, "You know, we have a saying, never judge a soldier until you see them in battle." She tilted her head. "And what do you think of me now that you have seen me in battle?" He smirked. "You're dangerous." Her pulse quickened slightly. Not out of fear, but something else. Something unfamiliar. She quickly changed the subject. "This war has cost both of our people too much. Do you believe peace is possible, Captain?" Grant's smirk faded. He looked out at the stars again. "I hope so. But I also know humans. We don't trust easily, and we never forget." Valerie nodded slowly. "The Xilari are the same." A heavy silence settled between them. For all their differences, they were more alike than either of them wanted to admit. She took a small step closer. "If this war does not end, it will destroy both our civilizations. Our leaders must see that." Grant sighed. "They see it, but seeing and accepting are two different things." She studied him carefully. His expression was serious now, thoughtful. There was no arrogance, no challenge, just quiet determination. "You fight not for conquest," she said, realization dawning, "but for survival." He met her gaze. "And what do you fight for?" She hesitated. The answer had always been simple: duty, honor, the empire. But for the first time, she wasn't sure if that was enough. "My people," she said at last, "just as you fight for yours." A small, knowing smile touched his lips. Then maybe we're not so different after all. The words unsettled her more than they should have. Because deep down, she knew he was right. The meeting chamber aboard the human space station was empty now, except for her. The negotiations had stalled once again. Both sides were stubborn, unwilling to make the final compromises needed for peace. And yet, she kept thinking about Captain Elias Grant. Ever since their duel in the rite of proving, he had been in her thoughts more than she cared to admit. He was different from what she had expected. Humans were supposed to be impulsive, unpredictable. But Grant was something else, calculated, sharp, and deeply loyal to his people. She had never respected a human before. Now she wasn't sure what she felt. A soft chime broke the silence. The doors slid open, and Grant stepped inside. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his dark hair slightly messy, but his sharp blue eyes were just as alert as always. "You've been sitting here for a while," he said. Valerie straightened. "I needed to think." Grant smirked and leaned against the table. "That's never a good sign." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you always joke in serious moments?" He chuckled. "Only when I don't like the silence." She sighed, looking away. "This war should have ended by now. Yet we continue to argue over borders and resources." Grant's expression turned serious. "Because neither side trusts the other." Valerie tapped her fingers against the table. "Trust is earned, not given." "Exactly." Grant crossed his arms. "So maybe we should start earning it." She frowned. "And how do you propose we do that, Captain?" Grant studied her for a moment. "There's a auxiliary supply convoy heading to a war-torn colony on the edge of your territory, right?" Valerie stiffened. "How do you know that?" "Intelligence reports." Grant shrugged. "Relax, Princess. We're not attacking it. In fact, I was thinking, what if we helped?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You wish to assist auxiliary convoy." "Why not?" he said. "It's a humanitarian mission, isn't it? Bringing food and medical supplies to civilians." She hesitated. "Yes, but..." "Then let's make a statement." Grant leaned forward. "A joint operation. Silari and Terran soldiers, side by side, protecting a convoy together." Valerie's mind raced. Such an idea was unheard of. No Silari had ever fought alongside a human before. And yet, if it worked, it would be proof that cooperation was possible. That peace was possible. She exhaled slowly. "My superiors will not approve." Grant smirked. "Mine won't either." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why suggest it?" "Because we both know this war has to end," he said simply. "And sometimes you have to take the first step, even if no one else will." Valerie stared at him. He spoke with such confidence, such certainty. It was frustrating and admirable. Slowly, she nodded. "Very well. I will arrange it." Grant grinned. "I knew you'd see reason." She sighed. "I already regret this." He chuckled. "Too late now, Princess." As he turned to leave, Valerie found herself watching him longer than necessary. Something had changed. She just wasn't sure what. Princess Valerie knew this better than anyone. No Xilari had ever willingly fought alongside a human before. Her people viewed them as dangerous, unpredictable. Humans were survivors, fighters who refused to surrender, and that made them both respected and feared. Yet here she was, standing side by side with Captain Elias Grant aboard a auxiliary battleship, preparing to escort a convoy together. The mission was simple. A fleet of Silari cargo ships carrying medical supplies and food was traveling to a war-torn colony on the edge of Silari space. The problem: pirates, mercenaries, and rogue factions often attacked supply lines, looking for easy prey. Normally, the Xilari would defend their own. But this time, a human warship would be part of the escort, a symbol of cooperation, a symbol of trust. Valerie glanced at Grant. He stood confidently, arms crossed, looking at the holographic map of their route. His presence aboard her ship still felt strange, but she had to admit, if any human could handle this, it was him. "You sure your people won't panic when they see us?" Grant asked with a smirk. Valerie sighed. "My warriors are disciplined. They will not let emotions cloud their duty." Grant chuckled. "So that's a yes." She shot him a glare, but before she could respond, the ship's communication system beeped. "Princess," one of her officers reported, "the convoy is in position. We are ready to depart." She gave a firm nod. "Proceed." The fleet moved into formation, slipping through the dark void of space. For a while, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then, Multiple contacts detected. One of the auxiliary officers called out. Unidentified ships approaching from the asteroid field. Valerie's body tensed. She turned to Grant. His easy smirk was gone, replaced by sharp focus. Pirates, he asked. Or worse, she muttered. The enemy ships emerged from the asteroid field, sleek and fast. Not just pirates, mercenaries. Well-armed, highly trained. A warning signal blared across the control deck. They're locking weapons on the convoy. Valerie didn't hesitate. All fighters, engage. The battle erupted in an instant. Silari and Terran ships moved as one, intercepting enemy fighters before they could reach the cargo ships. The sky was alive with energy blasts and missile trails. The enemy ships were fast, but Valerie's fleet was prepared. What she didn't expect was how well the humans adapted. Grant's warship took position alongside her flagship, covering blind spots and neutralizing threats with precision. His crew fought like a well-oiled machine, moving in perfect coordination with her forces, despite never having trained together. She had to admit, it was impressive. Not bad for a first mission together. Grant's voice came through the comms. Valerie smirked. Do not slow us down, Captain. A sudden explosion rocked the ship. The largest enemy vessel had broken through the defenses, heading straight for the convoy. Valerie's heart clenched. If even one cargo ship was lost, thousands of civilians would suffer. Grant's voice cut through the chaos. I have an idea. She didn't have time to argue. Then do it. Grant's warship charged forward, breaking formation. It was reckless, but effective. He drew the enemy's fire, giving her forces time to reposition. Valerie saw the opening. She seized it. Target their engines, she commanded. Silari fire rained down on the enemy flagship. Explosions rippled across its hull. With one final shot, the ship detonated, breaking apart in a fiery blast. The remaining mercenaries scattered, retreating into the void. Silence followed. Then, cheers. The convoy was safe. The mission was a success. Valerie exhaled slowly, turning toward Grant's ship. His voice came through the comms again, slightly breathless but triumphant. Well, Princess, he said, I think we make a good team. Valerie found herself smiling. Perhaps just this once, she agreed. But something had changed. Princess Valerie stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the human warship through the viewport. Its hull was scorched from battle, but it still stood strong, just like its captain. Captain Elias Grant, a human she had once considered reckless, unpredictable, and dangerous. Now she wasn't sure what she thought of him anymore. The communication system chimed. Grant's voice came through. I think that went well. Valerie let out a slow breath. You nearly got yourself destroyed, Captain. His chuckle was light. But I didn't. She shook her head. You humans take too many risks. And you Silari are too careful, Grant countered. That's why we make a good team. Valerie paused. A good team. It was true. For the first time in history, Xilari and a human had fought side by side. And together, they had won. She turned to her officers. Send word to the High Command. The convoy has reached its destination safely. The warriors saluted and got to work. She knew the news would be met with mixed reactions. Some in the Empire would see this mission as a success, a step toward peace. Others would see it as a mistake. But Valerie had made her choice. She tapped the communicator on her wrist. Captain Grant, dock your ship. We need to speak. There was a pause. Then his voice returned, amused. Sounds serious, Princess. Just do it, she said. A short while later, Grant stepped onto the Xilari flagship. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp as he took in the alien architecture. This is the first time a human has stepped aboard my vessel willingly, Valerie noted. Grant smirked. Glad to make history. She led him to a private chamber. No guards, no interruptions, just the two of them. She turned to face him. "You were right, Captain." He raised an eyebrow. "I usually am, but what about this time?" She sighed. "This war, it must end." His expression softened. "Then let's make sure it does." She studied him carefully. He had risked everything today. Not just his life, but his reputation. The same as her. And yet he still stood here, unwavering. "We are from different worlds, Captain," she said. "Different people, different traditions." Grant nodded. "But we both want the same thing." She exhaled. "Peace. For both of our people," he agreed. Silence filled the room. Not tense, not hostile. Just understanding. It was strange. How had a human, a soldier, become someone she trusted? Finally, she extended her hand. A Xilari gesture of respect. Grant blinked, then grinned. He took her hand firmly. "That's a start," he said. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Yes, it is." This was not the end. It was only the beginning.